Hey guys, I'm Andrew McComb and welcome to Web3 TV. In today's video, I'm with Justin Lacche, the Commissioner of the Omniverse Sports League, and we'll be discussing Web3 and how it improves lives and is leveling the playing field between large corporates and the everyday people. But before we do, make sure you register to watch every episode of Web3 TV here, where we share inspiring stories of all things Web3, making a difference to the world. All sorted? Okay, let's go. Justin, you've got a very clear vision of Web3 and how it improves lives and levels the playing field between, I guess, the normal person and the big corporates. So first of all, let's talk about what is Web3.
Let's start with the fundamental parts and then we'll kind of build the blocks on it, no pun intended. So fundamentally speaking, first off, Web3 is approach to technology through decentralizing how it's expressed digitally. So for example, right now, this interview is on Zoom. I could smile because one of my high school mates is a chief executive within Zoom. But at the end of the day, all Zoom rolls up to one company in the end and one single point of failure. So first off with Web3 is it's decentralized. So if this computer goes off in Web3, the digital expression continues. That is a huge paradigm shift. Because if you ever go down to your store, to your restaurant, or online and you hear, I'm sorry, the website is down, you can't do business. So fundamentally, the first step with Web3 is it's decentralized in how the actual code is executed, which is a huge step. The second step in is let's talk about the code itself. And whether you are a computer scientist or whether you don't really want to know the details, it's very important for how you can actually have a better life. So this is a very important conversation. Blockchain is a more elegant, decentralized way of coding things digitally. So for example, in the good old days of 2 years ago when dinosaurs roamed around Australia and the United States, if we were to do something like a Web 2 company, there would be oceans of code. And if people came and left, and if there were single points of failure, you're only inviting disaster at some point. You're only inviting at some point that the platform doesn't work, it doesn't scale, it doesn't optimize, it can fail. Blockchain itself is a much more elegant, robust, modern way of coding in a way that does not restrict how the digital process is done, but at the same time, it's Vladimir Putin proof. So if you hack it, if bad people hack it, you know that something's been done. So the next question is, well, Justin, wait a second. I read in the Sydney Times about people in the States who are going to jail because they took cryptocurrency. Web3 doesn't make you a good human being, but instead of taking 7 years to figure out you stole money, 3 weeks later, you're in handcuffs and you're pleading guilty. So that is in itself a huge paradigm. So none of us are saying that Web3 and blockchain makes people good human beings, but it does actually in terms of being accountable, traceable, much more elegant, it is and democratized, so there's no points of failure. It's a huge paradigm shift. The next step on the digital side, but has huge human rights is, you can have a product and layers of product, which is information. You can do data visualization, which sometimes is called a metaverse. You can have economics. You can grow in areas that typically you would need to have millions of dollars and probably either need to live in Sydney, Zurich, or New York to be competitive. Here, you can be in the most remote parts of Tasmania, the remote parts of Asia, the remote parts of South America, and be as competitive, sometimes more competitive because there's less competition, than the top 12 cities on Earth. That's done digitally because of how Web3 is expressed and coded and realized and democratized. But it is a huge human rights part to it. Now, of course, the next question should be, well, Justin, this is too good to be true, right? I think it's good to be skeptical. There is a challenging part to Web3, which is everything that you thought about economics, whether you grew up in a heavily capitalist, socialist, progressive, and everything that you heard about growing up is basically null and void. Because in Web3, the best ideas matter. It's decentralized. Communities decide things, not a single person. Economic models can switch very quickly. That's wonderful if you don't have, 7 children and running a farm. Like, then if you're young or if you're nimble, this is easy. If you have a lot of stake in your community, it can be scary. And so, yes, you have to be purposeful. You have to have the right business plan. You have to build a community. But the reality is that technology no longer holds people back with artificial barriers built because people don't trust each other, or built because of crime, or built because of different systems. It truly, Web3 is coded in a way where the best ideas can be accessed. And by the way, accessed in devices, if you're in Central Africa, an analog phone for $40. You can't do that today competing against Apple. I'm sorry. So there is a huge human rights element to it. And I don't want to overtalk it. I'm not saying that tomorrow morning it's going to happen, but it is already here. It's not going away. And by the end of this decade, just like once upon a time, my daughter said, Dad, were there typewriters in college and you had a chalkboard and a Xerox machine? What is that, Dad? In the end of this decade, there will be young people in Sydney, in Auckland, Tasmania, in Zurich that will say, you used to like try to use your debit card and it wouldn't work because the Wi-Fi went down. You used to like try to use a platform and then the person would quit and it would be bankrupt. That beautiful bliss is coming. And I think it's all of our opportunity to be a part of it now to realize the benefits of it.
So to someone who's new to this, because it's very exciting, right? It's bringing, as we said, power back to the people. But for someone who's maybe a little older listening to this, it's like they don't know what they don't know, but they're hearing something being spruiked as an amazing possibility for human rights, the history of the world, essentially. Where are they going to start? Like, how would you start as a newbie?
And first off, for your audience out there, I'm not too far away from turning 50, so I'm not exactly a newborn. And so what I would say is there is no age in learning. And I would say, so first off, be energized that this is truly for every age group. I would say though, fundamentally speaking, I always advise people, don't worry about being an expert in code or digital things. Talk about all the things when you go down to the store tomorrow and you want to buy some vegetables and some water and some snacks. Think of all the extra steps it takes. What does that mean? For example, how about the extra taxes you have to pay to get either to recharge your car or to use gas? Then when you go to the store, they don't have the exact supplies you want because you need to have a different kind of coupon. Then they charge you more money, even though you know it could be a lower price, but you don't want to drive across the street. Then when they bag something, you want to have something environmentally friendly, but they use a bunch of plastics that aren't good for the environment. Then when you get home, you realize when you open it up that some of the tomatoes and the fruit is actually spoiled. You have to return it, right? You could find 17 human friction points that we've been conditioned to accept. Well, that's part of life in Sydney or New York or Zurich or Tasmania. No. That's part of how, coming out of World War II, society tried to figure out how to be somewhat stable in a global economy now that we're 8 billion people. So what I would always say is write down all the things that you know are not needed, that are bureaucratic. Don't filter that, well, the government says I need to pay these taxes, or I have to settle for waiting for tomatoes on a Tuesday. Free your mind on the friction points. And then what you would start to say is, if you would reduce all those points, how much money, time, quality, decisions would you save? Guess what? You're already a Web3 product manager, even never knowing the code. Why this is important is because then it's not about you mastering the technology, but ask the hard questions of your bank, of your sports team, of your supermarket, of your family business. Why are we doing things this way? What is our technological plan? Have a community begin to discuss it. If you notice, the whole idea here is doing your own homework first, but then asking collaborative questions. That is the heart and the DNA of Web3, even before the code. If you train your mind that way, you will find the technology and time will come to you. Like I said, I'm pushing 50. There was a time out of high school when it was like, email my homework. Like, no, I need to type it out and Xerox it. And yet here we are. Does anyone today, does any 5-year-old in Auckland or Sydney or Tasmania, does she care about the code behind her email? No, because the platforms have evolved now to make it be friendly. So will be true with Web3, but the part is doing your homework about how to reduce friction. That superpower will get you in a position to actually and advance the technology as it comes to you.
Sounds incredible. Again, I'm going back to the newbie. It sounds to me like you're challenging me as a viewer to think better, think differently. How can I improve what I currently have, which I've been putting up with, maybe as what you call a friction point or a challenge or a pain in the ass, might be a good way to put it. And then how can we make that better? And then what I'm hearing is in Web3, and the geniuses behind the development of it are going to, they'll take care of the how. And what we have to do is come up with better ways of thinking and being able to, and obviously make the world a better place. I know that's kind of an altruistic way of looking at it, but that's what I'm hearing.
I firmly believe that, mate. And to support what you said, I mean, the two use cases I give, again, I'm very blessed. I've been blessed with health and great friends and family. And here I am pushing 50. But growing up in a very poor family, my family just assumed that you didn't go to college. And they assumed that you smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And they assumed that you wouldn't live to see 50. And they assumed that you would be poor and everybody else was bad and everyone else was out to get you. And that was the commonplace. And I love my family, but that was my culture. There was no point in trying because life is unfair. It took me a long time and some very supportive sports teammates and coaches to actually even think about, no, actually, I have to be responsible to learn. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. I have to build the muscle. I have to train myself and learn. That's why I say there's nothing special about me. But the one thing I do have is I outwork my competition. And in fact, my biggest competitors in cricket and in sports, every holiday, about 5 a.m, I send them a picture. I'm out wicket keeping in the rain. I'm like, hey, I hope you enjoy the holidays. You sleep in. I'm out here because I want them to know that hard work has a huge advantage. It may not solve everything, but what I would want your viewers to number one is the hardest part, and it's hard to not sound self-righteous, is the real key for you to having a better life is you have to look in the mirror. And I know people work hard, and I know that people are dedicated. I also want to say lovingly as a friend that a lot of the wiring about why you're holding yourself back is because you've accepted it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that, like, we've been taught, like, look, just don't make waves at school. If you want to have a good grade, make the teacher happy. Don't make the coach mad. If you want to make the team, or don't make the banker mad. We've been conditioned in post-World War II society to basically say, look, fit in and you can have a pretty nice life. Don't push yourself because then you'll be punished. The scary part about Web3 is to say, actually, no, all those friction points, while they were valuable after World War II, are now null and void. And now, if I'm a young child in poverty in Tasmania, I want to be more competitive than Goldman Sachs, and I'm going to be comfortable saying it. That's a very scary statement, especially if you're not with people that believe in that. That's where we as leaders have to get as many people comfortable with that, because the power is not me, it's we. That's the first part. The second part is that technology in many ways amplifies more of who you are. There are two expressions growing up. Money makes you more of who you are. It doesn't make you a good person. It makes you more of who you are. And technology does too. And in many ways, technology can be almost a confirmation bias. Meaning, I love technology. Technology, you and I, we are probably the furthest points on Earth right now, and we're talking in real time. We couldn't do that over postcards. But we know how to use technology. But technology can also reaffirm the negative stereotypes you have about yourself. Oh, I don't look as good as this actor. Oh, I'm not as good as this person. Oh, I'm not as rich as this person. And the technology can actually reinforce negative behavior. So the real superpower about Web3 is unlocking friction points in a way to say that just like when you were 7 years old and the world was fantastic and you were going to be, in your case, mate, in Auckland, you were going to be a professional beach player and you were going to actually walk on the moon and you were going to cure these things and you're going to be, there was no limit to you. Web3 unlocks the art of possible with your inner child, but it is very scary and it does take a lot of work. So what you and I want to tell people is it's not a magical thing in terms of tomorrow, but at the same time, in 2 or 3 years, you will have opportunities that would seem like a science fiction movie. And for us, it's worth putting in the effort.
It sounds to me, Justin, like it's rather than be a victim, be a victor. And to be the victor, you need to take self-responsibility. You need, and I say need in it, not in a dictatorial way, but it's like you need to be that open-minded person who's inquisitive enough to take some action into the possibilities that exist for you outside of what's currently happening. If that's what you choose, because that's the other thing. A lot of people couldn't care less, right? They don't care. They'll just do what's given to them. What's coming down the pipe, they'll just take that on as it comes. But we're Web3, right? So we're about being pioneers in the space and pioneer mindsets, etc. So, mate, super exciting. One thing I'd love to do for the newbies that are out there so that they can enhance their knowledge even more, and then ultimately we'll connect this back to how it's giving power back to them, is would you mind if we do a quick, and we'll call it a paragraph per piece, but it might be longer, but like a glossary session on some of the key terms in Web3 at the moment, and then how that's going to help them?
Let's do it, mate.
So the first one, and you mentioned what it does before, but just in a summary, what is the blockchain?
The blockchain is a series of digital decisions that you program, whether the decision is to have an action happen or an action not happen, but it's a set of instructions that you put into a single block because that set of decisions has to be decided on and peer reviewed. So in the real world example, if I were to code something right now for beach volleyball in Australia, one block of code might be, there's going to be a tournament tomorrow. Press this button if you're a player, and then if you're a player, it will take you to this hyperlink. That is one block of information. The power of having multiple blocks downstream is that while those decisions digitally can happen, there is also a way to trace it and peer review it for authenticity. So if we were to code the same thing, if we were to build an app on beach volleyball on lines of code, we would throw everything into the app and hope it works. Here, the second block might be, if you are an athlete, you must be registered and have your dues paid with the league. If yes, you will be able to have an entrance for your health waiver. If no, you will not be allowed to participate. Now, in a traditional site, maybe somebody hacks that. Maybe somebody says, like, I don't want to take that health thing. And by the time you figure it out, the tournament's over. And the blockchain, because each thing is segmented, it's not segmented by slowing it down, but it's segmented on peer review. The computers on the network would say, wait a second, Justin tried to cheat. He said that he did the health waiver on the second block, but he didn't do it. And it would alert the different nodes, which are different ways of all of the blocks are being peer reviewed. But as you can grow those different blocks, there are all these different decision trees that happen from a digital perspective, but they're both peer reviewed and there's no point of failure, so that if the beach volleyball app goes down in the old ways, nobody plays. But here, if the main computer goes down, there is no main computer, so life goes on. So from a digital perspective, it's very breathtaking about the way you can sort of segment where you want to review, peer review, but to actually have it be empowered. That's probably not the best way. I'm sure that there are computer scientists at the University of Sydney. Feel free to comment below, but really think of it as segmented ways of peer reviewing digital expression, but in a way that actually speeds up the process, not slows it down.
And it seems very trackable and very transparent as well. So does that, and I'm jumping out of context here, but are there companies out there and governments who may be afraid of the blockchain for that reason?
Yeah, yes, and I think that you don't have to be sort of a libertarian to want to understand that governments have their own bureaucracies, maybe for good-natured reasons, because they are trying to control an answer. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, I think that it's important to have some governance. But yes, look at the conflict between China, Australia, and the United States nationally about blockchain. Like Australia is the world standard of blockchain Web3 for farming. Like Australia and New Zealand. Like if you are into milk dairy farming, then you go to those two countries to learn. The United States is very successful on sports and business and insurance side. China, for as different as it is and complicated as a culture is, basically the amount per capita of people on Web3, by that number is stunning compared to anywhere else, even though there are nuances and the cultural changes. But government-wise, China has a very different view about what an individual should be able to peer review or not feel comfortable about. Australia and the United States have a different philosophy. So yes, that's a complicated side of it. But the beauty of Web3 in the end is that there is no government. For the government to turn off Web3, you have to shut off electricity, and then you have to shut off solar power. So I like our chances in Web3 that the people will decide. But that's where the hard part is. It's not somebody else to make it better. You have to actually express it digitally to have your voice be heard. And that's the hard part.
Interesting journey, hey? So as a visionary, long-term, you see the people will prevail in that sense that it's going to be more open, more honest. And like with the DAOs and stuff, people will be able to vote and it'll be trackable and so many benefits.
Yeah, I think that that will be present. I think that just a generation ago when we saw, I'll pick an example for those of us that are 50 years younger. If you're younger, look it up. But in my lifetime, Germany was split in half by a wall. Even through high school, Germany was split in half by a wall. Nobody knew at what point if you were in East Germany, when would you ever be able to be part of a unified Germany? We knew that the day would come because in Europe, the feeling was you can't look across a wall and see people having a normal, healthy family in a restaurant and be cool with being with German shepherds and barbed wire. So you knew the wall would come down, but to say that you know what that means when the wall comes down, there was a greater moment that Germany decided to unify at great cost. The same thing was at the end of this decade, whether you're born in China, Tasmania, Zurich, or in Peru, you will have as many opportunities digitally as Goldman Sachs. But what does that mean in terms of your human rights or the safety of your community? That's a deeper philosophical question. But I think what we all believe in is this. At the end of the day, the more people can be heard, respected, earn if their ideas are better, I like our chances versus the other system of walls, German shepherds, and barbed wire.
Yeah, exactly. Wherever there's resistance, there's going to lead to a war at some point, isn't there? So why don't we do it the other way around and have no resistance, borderless, and then inclusive, and see what magic can be created from it. Justin, back to the glossary. They talk about efficiency. What is efficiency?
So we'll talk about it first from a digital perspective, and then we'll talk about it in the real world. So again, if you were to look, I'm smiling because he's my high school mate, so he can always come razz me at the high school reunion. But even under Zoom, if we were to pop the hood right now, there are oceans of code that many thousands of people have over time, skilled people tried to put together to make this platform as robust as possible. By definition, in the old ways of computer science and coding, it's like having 50 people trying to make a pizza. Like, it could still taste good, but it's not efficient because everyone looks at it differently. The way that model, if you have 50 people making a pizza, there is no, even if you have a central recipe, people feel different, it's expressed differently, and the product is not the same. When we talk about digital efficiency, it's that instead of taking oceans of code to express something like you are going to register at the beach volleyball and you need to have your ID number and have your dues set and you have to pass a drug test. In older coding, that would be oceans of code with failure points. In blockchain, because of the advances of computer science and because the different blocks can actually validate yes or no much faster, it's much more efficient from an energy perspective, from a time perspective, and from a design perspective. So a real world example, whether you live in computer science or not, is if you're a Python coder, and if you don't know what that means, it's like saying if you speak a dialect of your language. So if you speak, so Python, like let's say you speak French, right? If in today's world, you can use much less words to communicate what you want to say in that language. So in Python, if you want to build Web3, you can use built-in functions already set, and then you can test it very quickly, rather than reinventing the wheel and then having people leave and come back and hire different people, where it becomes in energy non-efficient, it becomes platform non-efficient and non-scalable. So when we talk about efficiency from a digital perspective, it is that you express it faster, more secure, better, and more egalitarian. You can be a llama farmer in Peru and go on GitHub and pull down fundamentally the same types of code. I can't do that in Web 2. Now, there are real world advantages to that too, because when we talk about efficiency, like let's talk about the same thing about going, like let's say you're in a beach tournament and afterwards you want to go to dinner in Sydney. There are other efficiencies. If the Wi-Fi is down in the restaurant and you don't have money, you're washing dishes or you're running very fast away from the waiter. Or if there are supply chain issues that nobody could tell about the restaurant, they say, I'm very sorry, the special of the day is we're actually sold out, we're sorry. Or if there are issues in the power grid that no one can control because there's no way to tell it in time, you could have rolling power outages. It's not that Web3 solves that magically, but it does actually solve it if you apply it correctly at scale. So there are real world efficiencies where you don't have to settle for things that we always say like, oh, wow, the power's out. Oh, I'm sorry, they're out of lobster, even though I'm a vegetarian, right? If they're out of lobster, or, oh, wow, my debit card didn't work. Those are things we're conditioned to accept in an old way of too much code that doesn't work together. Blockchain fundamentally solves for that in a way that really democratizes the experience, no matter where you are in the world.
And accessible. So obviously efficiency is important, but accessibility is just as important. What does that mean in relation to blockchain and Web3?
I have some amazing childhood friends whose parents came over to work, and then they happen to be from Central Africa, and they've gone back and they're doing phenomenally well and raising families. What's amazing is they can be as competitive on Web3 on a $70 Droid phone as anything that Apple, I'm a short flight away from Cupertino and from Apple headquarters, and my friends in Central Africa can fundamentally design NFTs and their own blockchain businesses and their blockchain-based farming on devices under $70, and by the way, be the very top of their industry. This is very important because the traditional challenge of technology has been hardware was super expensive and inaccessible, and then software was built to serve inaccessible hardware. And then as things became more democratized, people had to settle for watered down versions of things that didn't work very well. So, and I say this lovingly because coming from a family with nothing, but even when I could finally afford in college to have some like electronic stuff, I had so many wires around my apartment. I'm glad that nobody like lit a match. I'm surprised I'm still sitting here because of just all of the hardware and software things you have to try to cobble together to make it somewhat work. So when we talk about this type of, democratizing hardware and efficiencies, it's about reducing the amount of access points to have the most meaningful experience digitally, but also to have that then translate to the real world. None of us want to wear goggles again, I'm a short flight away from Mark and Meta, and I have many dear friends there, but I don't want to wear goggles for 19 hours, Mark, sorry. But I am interested in having three-dimensional holograph-based projections of office environments or athletes to be able to have it be as neurologically amazing as possible. So when I go play my next match, I can be the best wicketkeeper possible. And what's amazing is that, in the old days of 2 years ago when dinosaurs roamed around Tasmania and Auckland, and is that you were talking about it would take oceans of investments to have that. We're living in a world now where, basically for, a US standards under $1,000, but, in basically in anyone's working standards, for a month's salary, if you're a working person, you can have the most competitive base hardware and base software as anyone in SpaceX launching people to Mars. And so that is a huge human rights thing. And that's the exciting part about being invested in this movement is it's not just about selling a quick picture of your cat dancing, winning the World Cup. It's about, I can really actually be as competitive as anyone on earth. And then that becomes my life has real opportunities. And to me, that's the power of this.
And truly accessible to everyone eventually, right? And again, we don't need to know about the how, we just need to know it's coming, and it will give that power to the people, the accessibility, the efficiency, And also what's this dynamic? What's it about dynamic? Is it ever changing, or what does that mean in relation to Web3?
I think that dynamic is that you can layer multiple things on a single decision rather than having it be stretched out. So the analogy that I would say is that before this thing called computers, for those of us 50 and above, most times when we made a copy of something, there was something called a Xerox or copy machine that would actually print. And the more times you printed it, the less quality it got. So it actually degraded the quality of the picture, degraded the quality of so if you had the same print 12 times, it would be unreadable. Dynamic means in a single block of information in Web3, you can have a very simple thing like, we're going to have a beach tournament. This block says you must be registered and in good standing with the league. But in the same block, it could also say, if yes, you get 5 coins that you can use to buy a snack. And on the same block, it can also say, you can also sell your picture with the league and make money. You can actually stack a lot of decisions on top of it in a way that's economic, business, process, workflow without slowing down any single decision. So that's where you can really, dynamic means you can have many layers of information. The same thing is true where the speed and the memory it would take to have a Zoom call 10 years ago was impossible unless you were at the University of Sydney. It just was not going to happen. Or if all your neighbors had to turn off their energy for an hour so you could talk to your mate. But because it can layer information now on Web 2, we can have this web conversation. But still, we're only doing 5% of what we could do on Web 3 because we could be doing tokenization, we could have intellectual property, we could be actually having real-term people voting on communities. We could have, those are the things that could happen in real time, and that is the real superpower of the technology.
Very powerful. And democratized, what does that mean?
That means you don't have to be a 7th-generation rich kid to have a fair shot at life. And I think that's where we go back to the original sports thing. One of the powerful things about sports, I mean, I'll take beach volleyball or rugby or cricket or surfing, is that the story of the young person who came from nothing and won the world championship. I mean, don't we all fall in love with that story most of all, because that means that's the best of all of us. The same thing with technology, where technology, and I actually want to give credit to technologists. I think in the last 25 years, many people have done the right thing. They've tried to lower costs. They've tried to work together. But the problem is how companies are funded, how investors invest is, unless you are the top product, unless you kill off the competition, you go bankrupt. Web3 is the opposite. Web3 is the best ideas exist, and you may change my idea. We're all going to make money. So instead of killing off each other, there's a race to excellence, not a race to the bottom of the lowest common denominator. So that's very important, not just in the technology side, because it brings out the best of how things are designed. It actually gets hardware people working with software people. I have some friends who work in hologram where they're actually lowering the cost. The goal is at some point in 2 years for $50 US, there'll be a 3-dimensional way of seeing your mate on your laptop and your Chromebook, which will be neurologically very exciting, the ways to learn. There was no incentive. In fact, you were legally barred many times from having those conversations. Now it's expected. Those are the types of democratizing, empowering things that technology is bringing the best out of all of us.
So to me, Justin, sounds like we're talking win-win here as a bigger picture for everyone. Collaborative, innovative, open possibilities for the benefit of all, as opposed to one.
It's win-win, and of course, rightfully, people should always be skeptical. So the analogy I would make is, the waves are much more breathtaking in New Zealand and Australia, but even for the surfing in Oregon, you don't have to pay any money to go onto the beach. You can rent a surfboard, but that does not make you a world-class surfer. So the same thing with Web3. The best surfers in the world, even the young people who are amazingly gifted, are the ones out in the water all the time in a different weather, who fall down, who are peer reviewed. When they fail with other people, they actually listen, they get coached. It's not like world-class surfers or world-class volleyball players, even if they have amazing gifts, are usually their hardest coaches and take the most brutal feedback because they want to get better. So that's the same thing with here. Of course, for those that are like, oh, it's too good to be true, Web3 will make me the best sheep farmer in New Zealand. No. But instead of other people being able to game the system that you don't even have a chance to compete in, It's a level playing field. And that in itself is a cause worth fighting for.
Absolutely. So again, we talked earlier about self-responsibility. The technology will be there, but how you use it is going to be up to you. But you're not restricted from using it necessarily, other than through your maybe closed mind or lack of knowledge or understanding, which is available to you if you choose to go out there and take action to find it.
And I would also have, people, I see people every day who are smarter or better than I am. Like I see amazing chefs. I'll never be able to cook like an amazing chef, like my friend, or I see amazing quantum physicists. I love quantum mechanics, but I can never teach at the University of Sydney. It's not about being overwhelmed by being the best, because the same point is, if everyone with a PhD and an expert, if everyone had the answers, we'd all be living on solar powered stuff with a clean ocean and no war. So obviously the human condition is a little bit more complicated than that. But what I would say is that it goes back to the original point, which is start to ask yourself over the next, even make it 90 days, so it's tangible but not too pressure. Over the 90 days, really think about, when do you use technology? When do you use apps? When do apps make you check something even though you don't want to check it? Do you really how do you get benefit from the apps and the technology? And have to play the same thing with when you go shopping or your work. Critical thinking is the start superpower, because it's how no one person solves everything. But if you're comfortable then asking your doctor, well, why do I need to have this medicine? Or if you go down to your library, how come I can't access this newspaper? Or if you go to the bank, why do I have to wait 15 days for a loan that I've been approved from? You will find more people will ask the same questions. And then it's up to the companies, the Omniverse Sports Leagues of the world, the Web3 TVs of the world, to provide options. But the market will come to the people. So your job as a customer is to vocalize your expectations and questions. And then it's the industry's job to provide options.
And as you said, but what it really requires is just to be a critical thinker and observe what's going on around you and say, how can we do this better? So you mentioned the Omniverse Sports League. Tell me, what is the Omniverse? And then we'll get to the next question, which is, what is the metaverse and what's the difference between the two?
Great question, because this was really the fundamental part of a business plan. And it goes back to the original point, which was we didn't want to create video games. And there's nothing against that. I would say I'm more of an athlete than an esports gamer. But I definitely learn a lot from the esports gamers who do that more than athletes. But an Omniverse is understanding that as we progress in this decade, technology and the real world are essentially married together. And I have mates who live very much off the grid, off solar power and some connection. But the reality is that even if you're completely off the grid, other people's technology will affect you. Even if you're in Antarctica, the decisions that people make about that melt the ice caps affect you. So you're not, no one, even when Elon sends 1,000 mates to Mars from Australia and everything, the technology will still be about that. So you don't have to be in love with the technology, but you must be agnostic, just like we have to be agnostic that we need to have an ozone and clean air and a clean ocean, even if you don't live near the ocean. So the Omniverse is that technology and the real world are one, and that the technology should make the real world better, but it's up to the real world to take ownership and not be passive in the technology. There's an equilibrium there, and there's a responsibility there. The metaverse is the digital, the Web3 realization of that. So when we talk about blockchain-based technology, when there is data visualization, whether it's like graphics about whether it's your school recreated or a video game setting or something if the underlying code of that data being visualized is on blockchain, that is fundamentally what a metaverse is. It is the data visualization backed by a blockchain. But why that's very important, and I know that there's been rightfully so some skepticism on the investment side, but rather than a company being able to shut it down or a company to be able to take your data, the protection, all the superpowers of data, economics, tokenization, collaboration, that is what you can realize through a metaverse. So in a real world example, I really just how no, if you would have told any of us 5 years ago, hey, someday in the University of Sydney, there's going to be a pandemic, and one day you're going to go there and your professor's going to lock you out and say, come back in 2 years, you would be laughed out of the continent. And yet here we are. I'm here to tell you that someday a child in Tasmania who can't go to Harvard, she will actually go to Harvard, and it will digitally be three-dimensional. It'll be dynamic. She will be seen for who she is as a real person, not as a video game. And she will be able to actually do modeling in terms of the data modeling and the data science or the art or the anything that she wants for her degree, as much as I can across the street look at the University of Oregon and have her data protected, Vladimir Putin proof. That's the metaverse that I think is exciting. So the real world part of it, there will always be bakeries, fisheries, ocean stuff, volleyball, as there should be. But now, if you take the real world and the metaverse, you have a dynamic omniverse.
And you mentioned resistance there of the metaverse. Why, like, is it too good to be true? Is it something they can't get their head around? What's with the resistance? Or is it threatening even?
Yeah, so I want to give people credit. I think given what the planet has gone through the early part of this decade with coronavirus and regional wars, I think people have been heroic in embracing digital expression. I think that the two issues are, number one, that Web3 is being pushed by Web2 investors. So I have deep friends who are in huge banks, but they're about sort of, I need to have 17% return on investment in 31 days or I'm liquefying your company. That is an old Web2 way of business. If you have a Web2 metric and you're a young Web3 firm, good luck. So that's why the Omniverse Sports League was very risky, because we were saying no thank you to Wall Street, which was not very popular the first 4 days when I introduced this to the investors, but that's a lifestyle choice. The other issue is, and I want to give credit to the media, because I think a lot of technology reporters are doing the legwork, but a lot of my job every month is actually quietly off the record talking to major global reporters, award-winning reporters of technology, and saying things like, here's actually what Web3 is. Here's a blockchain. Here's what the code looks like. Because they've been thrown into this, their Web2 editors are like, you need to be the first person in Davos to explain how coming out of that, the House of Saud is going to use Web3 to change Saudi Arabia. Or if you're not, you're fired. That's a Web2 way of motivating somebody. So we try to empower the media so that it's, bad actors should always be outed immediately. But for example, 4 years ago, I was telling people in Oregon, which is part of farming of America, I'm like, look at what Australia and New Zealand are doing with dairy and blockchain and farming. It's breathtaking. And so those are things that may not be sexy for page one in the BBC, but they should be. And that's part of democratizing the information so that people can realize it's already here. And in fact, at a larger scale than most of us realize.
Well, interesting question is for me as well, because sometimes how I feel, we're talking about concepts that most people don't know what they don't know yet about what we're talking about, right? And that's why we're talking about it, because we want to translate these conversations so they do understand. How do you find or feel on a day-to-day basis when you're having these conversations with large corporates or governments or whoever, investors, etc., and they're just looking at you like you're mad? Like, how do you personally deal with that?
I think back to growing up, and I had some amazingly kind family members. And I think both what motivates me and to be honest with you, where I struggle with it is when I look back at those pictures and I see people in my family in their 30s who look like they were 60, who to their credit only gave what they had so that I would have a better life, whatever that meant. They couldn't even know what that meant. It's easy for me to be humble and to think about the fact that I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because a lot of good people who decided to go to their graves not having a better life decided that this young kid was going to be the one to have a better life. And I feel a moral obligation. So when I see, the hardest part is not people singing Fortune 500 saying, oh, you're crazy. The hard part is to say, yeah, we'll do it 70%, but we're going to have licenses and closed system and take the money and run. And then when I say no, they get upset with me, and then we have to go out for drinks and pizza and make friends nice. But the hardest part there is that it is so tempting to settle. The hardest part of business, the hardest part of my job is I have investors who are actually like, you're holding us back, man. 6 teams, we could have 26, and think about all the growth. And they're right, except that the risk of us failing or lowering our product is significant. And so the same thing, and the hardest part of investors who watch a show or leaders is that gray space, that equilibrium where it's not about getting all that you want, but when you know fundamentally, if you sell this one thing out, you're on the wrong side of history. That's a very hard thing to do. And I had the luxury of being 48, my daughter already being in college and I'm not being self-righteous, but I'm telling you point blank that there were many times when the easy, lucrative way would have been there. And we would have never had a conversation because they would have dissolved the Omniverse Sports League, liquidated it, and gone. And we can't stand for that.
Very honourable, mate. So stay true to yourself is what I really heard. And that takes a lot of character, especially in today's society. So, mate, full credit to you for that. Now, back to the glossary, decentralization. What is it, and why is that so important with Web3?
An analogous I would use is, let's talk real world first, and I'll talk technology. One of the hard parts about in America right now is we have 2 political parties. And when I was a young kid, they would play nice enough. And even though there were only 2 parties, there were enough differences that it was more of a parliamentarian system than it was. Now today, it's like yes or no, in or out. Every 4 or 8 years, there's a different party. So I would say that, imagine in parliament, the power of having 5 parties, having a decentralized way of decision-making it's frustrating electing a prime minister, but you have different schools of thought because there's no single point of person in control. So in the technology side for decentralized, it is that in the traditional way of 2 years ago when dinosaurs walked around Auckland and Tasmania and Sydney, is that essentially every app, every digital thing rolled up to one government or one business or sometimes a computer. And when that was hacked, corrupted, failed, then the entire system was compromised. Decentralized means that the blockchain code, so let's say if we did our beach volleyball league on a blockchain, it would be over global networks running at the same time. So if my computer falls into the ocean and stops working, business goes on. Is that the technology will pick up and feed off of each other to have the blocks as they are evolving, as a new code is happening, continue to go. And so think of a node as a different computer or a different server. So these different nodes, different computers are in real time telling each other, here is the longest chain. That's a huge paradigm shift because it's Vladimir Putin proof in that if you cheat the system, everybody knows. Or if one person says, I want to retire and go raise my sheep in Auckland, great, have at it. The company doesn't go bankrupt. So that is a tremendous, from a computer science perspective, that's space age. But from a business and human rights perspective, that is the real turning point because now it is the ecosystem keeps these things going, not a single point of failure. And that, to me, while scary for some, that is a real superpower of Web3.
Wow. Again, all I'm hearing is brings the power back to the people. Segue, I guess, also to smart contracts. So what are smart contracts and how are they different to a standard contract?
I think smart contracts is the real amplifier superpower of Web3. So even in today's digital contracts of Web2, let's go back to the beach volleyball. Let's say we were going to pay 10 athletes, $50,000. Even if it was electronically captured, those would let's actually break it down. They'll be tied to the bank of the league. They would have to be authorized by the controller. The controller would have to have both a login to a website that could fail. At that point, we have to have the bank accounts of each athlete. If there's any issues with the numbers or if there's a failure or a Wi-Fi goes down, the money might go down. So even in a digital contract where everyone agrees to it, there are 17, 77 points of failure, even if digitally you agree, because human beings have to be guarding each step of the way. And if you don't get paid, you have to go to binding arbitration and go to court for 3 weeks and try to get your money back. A smart contract reduces the friction in a blockchain, where if you and I agree that you as an athlete will get $50,000 from me and we program it, then neither you nor I can stop it once the minimum real world thing happens. So once you go to the tournament and you sign in, you are now officially an athlete. The money is yours. There's no need to worry about cheating the system, or if I only give you $5,000, you're immediately flagged, and the proof is in the code. So it doesn't stop bad actors, but it reduces all those friction points. So the smart contract is how to enable meaningful business decisions within a blockchain system, and that is the Web3 superpower.
So big question I have from myself and the viewers is, so smart contracts seem to me to be a lot smarter, right? A lot more transparent. And my thoughts are, though, if I transact, say, with someone I don't know who's in a different country to me, and we create a smart contract relevant to the agreement, whatever that happens to be, but they still don't adhere to the contract, how is that policed, other than me showing the police or whoever's policing the information? Does it still protect me in the deal, if that makes sense?
That's a great question. And I think that, to be transparent, that is where international business has some significant growth to do the rest of the decade. So the way that I would say that is, if you're doing, like for ourselves, we have athletes in 31 countries, some of those countries are not stable. Like the athletes are honorable people, but even the local jurisdictions, I always say that probably 20% of our league is in a civil war at any given time of the year. So these are real world issues. What I would recommend in international business is you have to code those fail safes into the contract. So you have to always be a good business person. And the power of a smart contract is the actual lines of code to achieve a decision are many times 1/10 what it would be in an analog way. But to be honest with the situation, if you're doing something that requires like a piece of expensive art, where that art is transferred and it may or may not get there, I can't always promise you that Picasso will not be taken. But what I would say is you would have the fail-safe to say something like, this would go immediately to arbitration in this jurisdiction, who has the ability to withdraw a 25,000 euro penalty. Those are not the most elegant steps, but given how decentralized human beings are, it is still much better than trying to even digitally going to some international body and filing it.
And I guess, as you said, over the next 10 years, it's only going to get better. It'll evolve as technology evolves and understanding of it evolves.
Typically, what you see today when you hear terms, and in a future show, we'll get super detailed, but when you have private blockchain would be the University of Sydney has a blockchain where you have to have a @universitysydney.au email address to access. A public blockchain would be where you could buy coins and log in, like if our volleyball team was just open. So the challenge would be in an open spaces, you could do something like, if the art doesn't get there, there is going to be an escrow, immediately a withdrawal side. So there is always a degree of but in the code. But what I would say is, even today, when we're dealing with, it's not that we don't trust our coaches or athletes or players, but if they're in jurisdictions where somebody tries to do something of bad acting, we have fail safes that to this day are much better coded than we could ever expect in a normal digital banking contract.
Very cool. And so trustless. We talk about trust and that people are trustworthy, and they use the term in Web3 about trustless, but actually trustless, is that a positive thing?
I think so. I think when we talk about trust, of course, it's based on the human unknown, but like, let's take a real world banking example where, and today, if I work at a restaurant and I'm also a student at the University of Sydney, right, and I want to pay some of my money to the university, the reason why there are many people at the bank and at the restaurant and where I live is because there could be human errors or a fraud or a mistake or a single digit where it wipes out somebody's money, and it becomes almost impossible to trace it in the old Web 2 paradigms. So trust, yes, there is an element of, I don't want Vladimir Putin knowing about my kid. I don't trust Vladimir Putin. But there's also the real world side where there are so many humans that are hired. There are great people that are just hired to sort of go through Microsoft Excel spreadsheets or to manually write down things and authorize payments on the back end. It's actually very scary sometimes. It's amazing that we have any Western banking system when you think about all the steps. So the trustless side of smart contracts is to basically say that if we have authorized people at the Sydney restaurant, at the University of Sydney, and the banks, and I log in and press a button to say, I want to pay for my 3 credits of accounting at the University of Sydney. And the University of Sydney says, you are a student, you press that button. It does not require the 84 people to then cut and paste and reconcile and the Western society. And I would also say that this is not about eliminating jobs at all. I would say this is about unlocking people's potential. But I do believe that a lot of the trust-based bureaucracy that we have, it's not a accident that every 8 years we have a major recession and then a bubble and then housing is impossible and then interest rates. It's because governments are layering bureaucracy to figure out what to do because they're guessing wrong. They don't trust each other. I would much rather have smart contracts over time solve for that and then really let the decisions on their own stand tall.
Exciting times, Justin. So if we look back at the context of this video or this lesson or this glossary, it was all around leveling the playing field and bringing the power back to the people. So if you were to summarize everything we've talked about now, what would that summary be?
I would start off by saying that you have as much right as King Charles III in England to be your best self. I don't care what your last name is. I don't care who you're married to. I don't care how much money you have. You fundamentally, as a human right, have a right based on your talent and your decisions and your ability to be competitive to have the best possible life that you can generate. That's a human right. I believe that that is realized much closer through Web3 blockchain technology because the technology it lowers the cost, it levels the playing field, it calls out fraud. It allows for real world business to be optimized in a way that's achievable, whether you're very poor or whether you come from an era where you didn't even have technology. You can have a community around you of people that can empower you in a way where your ideas can stand. Through opportunity, it's only realized through hard work, a good plan, and the ability to go into the abyss and the unknown. But I would say, especially, I know that you have a global audience, but let's take Australia, the great innovative culture, New Zealand, Tasmania, the great innovative cultures that have basically built generations. The native people and those that have come have faced the unknown with bravery and talent and dignity. And it's not about guessing right all the time, but it's about entrepreneurial spirit. And I do believe at the end of this decade, there will be a young girl in like Auckland or Sydney or Tasmania or in Seoul, Korea or in Portland, Oregon that will say, Dad, was it really true that people that had this last name couldn't go to college? Or Dad, was it really true that if you lived here, the government would take your money? Or Dad, was it really true that you couldn't go to college if you lived on a farm? And they will look at us like we are rightfully the dinosaurs that we are. And that is a cause we all should get behind.
And an absolute reason for everyone to embrace Web3 if it deems to be true, which on paper it's what's being built in the background is evolving and is becoming. So viewers, if you love what you've heard, and I certainly have, get on board. Justin, for the viewers' sake, we mentioned a fair bit about beach volleyball there. Guys, if you've missed it, and this is the first video you've seen from Web3 TV, Justin and I had an amazing conversation about his background and how he came into be not only the commissioner of the Omniverse Sports League, but just into Web3 in general. And we also talked about my background in beach volleyball and how I guess Web3 is a way of being able to enhance that process, which is what the Omniverse Sports League is doing as well. So guys, if you want to watch that, there's an awesome interview here. I'll put a link here for you. Justin, you are the commissioner of the Omniverse Sports League, but you're so much more than that. You're a doyen or a missionary or an evangelist in the Web3 space. Mate, I really want to say a huge thank you from all our viewers for coming on the show and sharing incredible wisdom, and not just wisdom, but just probably vision and visionary, being a visionary and helping inspire so many people to, I guess, as we said about, talked about earlier, is actually embrace a different way of thinking. Look at maybe how you're being hoodwinked at the moment by all the friction in your life, not only through just the fact that it hasn't been thought of differently, but also the people behind it maybe. And mate, so just to have you on here to help them open their mind a little bit to the infinite possibilities that exist for them is probably the big takeaway for me, mate. So I really want to say a massive thank you on behalf of Web3 TV, myself and Pete, and obviously wish you all the best with everything you're doing. The other thing too, guys, if you haven't seen Justin's interview with us about his story, we're also going to do a business use cases story, which I'll also put the link here as well, that talks about not only Omniverse Sports League, but also how that can be applied to your potential sports league and or company and or organization as well. So we'll see you in the next episode, Justin.
Mate, I appreciate you. Let's go put a dent in the universe. Cheers.
Well, there it is, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Web3 TV episode. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. And remember, if you'd like to watch every episode of Web3 TV, visit the link below or subscribe to our channel. And remember to hit the bell icon so that we can notify you every time a new episode is released. I'm Andrew McComb, and I look forward to sharing more inspiring Web3 TV episodes making a difference to the world. I'll see you soon.